Is Ethiopia ready for democracy? Opportunities and Threats for the Minorities by Professor Abdi Khalil and Amira Abubakar. Narrated by Iman Jami. Ethiopia is at a crossroads since it is a hotbed of ethnic conflict, illustrating the fearsome complexity of the mindset among its population. On the surface, it appears to be heading to some democratic changes, but beneath the surface, it is boiling with miscarriages of justice, abusing the majority of minorities, and becoming fertile ground for anarchism. On the positive side, the release of political prisoners, provisionally accommodating various political parties, and reconciling with neighboring countries appear to colorfully paint the road to democracy. Realizing these conflicting phenomena, it begs to differ the question: is Ethiopia ready for democracy or bound to continue with business as usual? Does adopting democratic ideology alter the default mindset of ethnocracy? It is almost a year since the seemingly revolution or political evolution with swift, unprecedented changes within the EPRDF and shift of power from one ethnic group to another manifested with assorted ethnic violence and abuse of human rights across the country. Noting the ethnocracy, paranoid and hypocritical attitudes of the current regime as repeatedly demonstrated by neglecting the abysmal human tragedies and the democratic rights of the minorities, we beg to differ from the current authorities who are painting a rosy picture of relationships among the 83-plus ethnic groups in a country, especially when the federal government ignores the rights of minorities, not upholding the rule of law against land and property predators, as well as miscarriages of justice by larger ethnic groups against the smaller ones. At the same time, it is sad to know that under the clear sky, Ethiopia is not even remotely close to being a democratic country as it was witnessed in the currently released Democracy Index of 2018. It placed Ethiopia at the bottom 10 of 165 countries around the globe. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy Index, or the EIU, it is a snapshot of the state of the world democracy for 165 independent states and 2 territories. The Democracy Index is based on 5 categories. They include the electoral process and pluralism, civil liberties, the functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. Based on their scores on 60 indicators within these categories, each country is then self-classified as one of 4 types of regimes. 1. Full democracy. 2. A flawed democracy. 3. A hybrid regime. And 4. An authoritarian regime. When democracy is not functioning or implemented properly, this is vivid evidence and demonstrations from international body that why the country is consumed with tribal violence, abusive minorities, and miscarriages of justice, and most of all, implying how the federal government neglects the rights of minorities and failing in the application of democratic principles and the rule of law in the country. Behold of security and peace first to take the first step towards a democratic system. The rule of democracy states that the power belongs in the hands of the people. In accordance to this rule, no one political party or ethnocentric party is above the law and merely dictating the rules to the rest of the citizens. In principle, of course, the minorities would have equal role based on equality and equity. The majority of the population must come to an agreed-upon consensus to have a functioning and active government, including the majority of minorities, with their rights being upheld. No one should be left out. An eminent characteristic of democracies around the world is the existing of many political parties. The exact definition of political parties is conflicted because while some think of parties as bodies of persons united for promoting their joint endeavors and national interest upon some particular principle in which they all agreed, others maintain that a party is an organized group of gain control of the government under the group name by winning elections and public office. In Ethiopia's case, where ethnic political forces dictate, how does the large ethnic party equitably espouse the minority groups to establish a democratic country. Having set the above as a premise, let me now analyze the current Ethiopian political movements. As Ethiopians, we are well aware of the current political revolution or evolution that has brought us to our current moment in history. There are fertile grounds for political transformation and building the new road towards democracy. The air of freedom is affecting the entire nation in both positive and negative ways. This polarity is to be expected from a nation that has been silenced for decades, if not centuries. The air of democracy we see, though it is a great start on the path towards democracy, unless the rule of law remain the governing law for the safety and security of all nations, there is no doubt that freedom without rule of law will not lead any nation to democracy, but surely lead towards anarchy and a lawless society. In almost a year now, the lawlessness and anarchism have displayed rapidly across the country with rare intervention from the current federal government. It is also true that rule of law without freedom will lead to tyranny as well. The transition to the so-called democracy manifested the mono-ethnic dominancy that deemed exercising authoritarianism as being categorized by the EIU 2018 Index. The current Ethiopian political movement, with all the uncertainty that is flaring everywhere, yet witnessing the many opposing political parties successfully communicating with one another, forming alliances, holding productive political debates, are very inspiring. The path to democracy is long and arduous, and to implement democracy that includes everyone is not an easy task. To purge the tyranny of the past and the current ethnocentric mindset from the consciousness of a nation, that is a daunting task. However, changing the mindset of a nation that wants democracy is a must. As Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Which means, before we say, let us march towards democracy, we have to pave the way first. That means, analyze the indoctrination that has been implemented on the mass consciousness for many decades. Healing the nation from the past trauma, start clearing the painful past by removing the constitutional level. The mental blockages built by the past regimes. We have to educate the nation on what democracy is, including equity and equality with humanity at its core. Above all, rule of law needs to be enforced at all times so that the citizens feel safe, secure, and free. Democratic transition and consciousness transformation need to move along in parallel. Then and only then can we say we are on the road to democracy. Only then can we say that there is a chance for implementation of true and lasting democracy. But a strong government that is fully supported by the nations is priority number one, without which none of the above mentioned can come to fruition. What does that government look like? Today in Ethiopia, there are many political parties that are recognized by the current government. What makes them very unique is that each of the parties represent their own special groups, often ethnic groups, and few of them can represent the other many social groups. Each one of the many existing political parties have their own versions of democracy, that is, democracy for their social group. Looking at each of these parties, we need to ask if they qualify to lead Ethiopia towards democracy. How can a party that has formed along its ethnic line that is not inclusive lead a nation towards democracy? Each of these political parties present their own ethnic-based plan that leads towards democracy. They all mention the current problem of the people not going out to vote. They complain about this issue without realizing the underlying problems that exist. To them, democracy means the right to vote, which is just one of the elements. If a nation has the right to vote, does that mean there is democracy? We have to deeply think about that. Mind you, even voting can take place in a very flawed democratic system, or even in an authoritarian regime as well. In Ethiopia today, of the 83 plus social groups, Only 2 or 3 have political parties that represent them. Yet these parties expect the remaining social groups to vote for them, although none of the parties include the remaining ethnic groups or represent them. What we are witnessing today is that everyone is inside the forest trying to plant a tree of their own, the kind of tree they believe would feed their own social groups. However, what Ethiopia needs is a party that steps out of the forest to look at the forest with all the existing trees and succeed to plant a new tree that will feed all the people inside the forest. Such party can only be the Ethiopian People's Party, that is an inclusive and representation for all nations and nationalities within Ethiopia. Ethiopian People's Party should be an association of members who share certain principles and who strive to elect candidates, often merit-based, for the purpose of advancing those principles. This ideal party should be committed to the view that the dignity of all Ethiopians is the cardinal principle of democratic society and the primary purpose of all political organizations and activities in such society. The party should be dedicated to the principles of building a society that is governed by the rule of law, individual freedom, and responsibility of human dignity in a framework of a just society, and political freedom in the framework of meaningful participation by all persons in this society. This ideal party is bound by the Constitution of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and is committed to the pursuit of equity and equality for all persons, and to the enhancement of our unique and diverse cultural community, to the recognition and preservation of the multicultural identity of all Ethiopians. Its tenet should be diversity in plan and unity in action, where even a person from a minority social group should have a chance to become the leader of that country. Ethiopia has assorted ills from the past and engulfed with ethnic conflict now and again. However, it should not dwell on the past, but to learn from the past and move forward by resetting the mindsets and change the default inhumane attitude. We have a lot in common. It should reset itself with the twin concept of democracy and human rights that gives opportunity to all, including the minority social groups. In Ethiopia, currently the struggle for democracy is fundamentally a struggle for basic human rights, equity, and equality. It appears representative democracy is perceived as the panacea of Ethiopia's tribulations, and even in the essential catalyst for equity and equality that would ease the dominance and threats from the larger social groups. In a very inclusive manner, not assimilation or marginalization, but national integration and multiculturalism with representative democracy complemented with the basic rights of self-determination to enhance capacity for economic, social, and political development should be the way to get out of the gloomy trend or political uncertainty. Until the Ethiopian government is receptive to such high-level consciousness and actions or pave way for basic human rights, the dignity of all of its social groups, upholding the rule of law, justice, for the minorities, and instills equity and equality in its political disposition. Ethiopia will not be ready for democracy remotely. The essence of equity and equality emanates from humanity, not from artificial physical differences that set ablaze among various socio-cultural groups in Ethiopia. The opportunities and threats should be sorted out with high-level humane consciousness at its core, coupled with vital indoctrinations of the mass to holistically understand equity and equality among its 83-plus ethnic groups for peace and prosperity for all. IHMS,